Tahoe. I'm sure I'm not alone when I tell you that despite this great conference, I can't wait to get outside again. This place is beautiful. By way of introduction, again, my name is James Moore. I'm the Chief Revenue Officer for Simpli.fi. I've led the sales team here since 2010, so it's been about almost 9 years that I've been leading the sales organization. Prior to that, I built a site retargeting company called Fetchback that we sold to eBay, became eBay Enterprise. And I partnered up with a guy named Frost Prelo and Paul Harrison, who built a technology company that was acquired by Collective. And we all came together and decided we're going to build the world's 200th DSP, which is great. Anyway, the company's headquartered in Fort Worth, Texas, but I collect my mail in Phoenix, Arizona. It's 114 degrees today in Phoenix, Arizona. So I'm super excited to be in Tahoe. So I'm going to be talking about specifically, there's a million things we could talk about, but I'm actually going to show you a static live demo in our UI of our new addressable audience curation capabilities. We just want to show it to you. It's one of the fastest growing product releases that we've deployed in our UI. But before I do that, I want to introduce you to the company and maybe reintroduce you to the company. So we're a demand-side platform. It's not cool to call yourself a demand-side platform anymore. You have to call yourself a marketing operating system or whatever else drives up valuations. But that's what we are. We're in the data-driven advertising business. And we'd like to think that we're probably one of the fastest growing, most successful companies that's probably not in your stack that you didn't really know about. This month, there's more than 130,000 campaigns that are live on the platform right now in support of about 32,000 advertisers. We've got about 450 agency partners. And if you go to our website or happen to read that lovely flyer that's in front of you, it basically says that we're in the local programmatic or localized programmatic business. Basically, it's this. We built a system to ingest, bid, report, and optimize on unstructured data, behavioral data, and mobile GPS data to try to provide performance faster on fewer impressions. And it turns out anybody who's doing highly localized campaigns, we all know the challenges with data segment fidelity, but segments don't play nice with low spend. So we've had to build basically a unique workflow and a unique technology to drive performance for people who have lots of small campaigns. So half of my business is 50% of the top 10 TV, cable, radio, newspaper companies who have hundreds of salespeople who are selling every small business in your community mobile geofencing, behavioral targeting, CTV. They sit on top of our API. So I have 30 clients with more than 2,000 live campaigns, and there's probably 15,000 reps out selling programmatic solutions that activate on our platform. The other half of my business is we work directly with large brands and agencies. Some of my largest clients are companies like Subway, Quick Trip, Jack in the Box, Edward Jones, Allstate. These are organizations that have hundreds or thousands of very small campaigns that you have to be able to manage from a workflow with high performance goals. And we built some unique workflow to do that. So that's who we are. So there's this like tsunami of events taking place in the industry. We've talked about a lot of them here in this conference. It's been incredibly educational for me. I wanted to touch on 3 or 4, mostly because what I want to show you takes 5 minutes and I need to fill 20. But having said that, these are some of the variables that are out there that we have to take into consideration as we continue to innovate and try to future-proof audience targeting solutions. I want to touch on them one by one. Clearly, everybody in this room knows that there's this device proliferation taking place. Anybody here remember the world before the internet? Right? The last commercial restriction was removed off the internet in 1995. Google founded in 98. I remember a world before the internet. If you were in advertising, it was real simple. You knew which shows people watched. You knew which networks they aired on. You knew which time they were going to be tuning in. You knew which radio stations you listened to, which local newspaper they read, and which one of 3 to 5 networks they were tuning in to get their nightly news. Advertising was pretty simple. But the internet fractured the distribution channel. People started consuming content wherever they want. And then, of course, mobile. How many years we stood at these conferences and they said it's going to be the year of mobile, and then one day it just became the year of mobile, right? 4G came out, I think, in 2010 or 11, and then from 13 to 18, now 90%, probably 100% in this demographic. Everybody in here has got a smartphone. The sale of smartphones is growing 7 times faster than the rate of population in this country, while desktop and laptop sales are relatively flat. And now, of course, we've got the television set. Every television set that's coming out today is web connected, or got a web connected device plugged into it. And with IPv6, if you sit from where we sit on the technology side, television sets are starting to look eerily like giant mobile devices hanging on a wall. And so as we work toward IFA identification, now we've got to deal with this kind of one-to-many medium that we can tap into and link up with these kind of one-to-one type distribution mediums, and that's something we have to take into consideration. I don't need to preach to this group about the migration of eyeballs going from linear. I don't think I have to preach to that group. Deloitte in March of this year released a stat that said 69% of U.S. households are tapping into one or more subscription for video on demand or streaming services, most of which are ad supported, some of which are not, right? If it's a millennial household, it's a staggering 88%, and those same households, only 51% have a cable subscription. And it was 1 year ago in Q3 of 2018 when the cable companies announced that for the first time in the history of their company, more than 1,000 subscribers canceled their contracts. And it's only accelerated since then. So finally, the migration of eyeballs, cord cutting, cord stacking is starting to reach kind of a critical mass, and that's something that we have to take into consideration with web-connected audience targeting. And then there's this whole privacy thing. Gosh, everybody in here has been talking about it. Canada, California, GDPR, all the things, the political climate, everything that's going to follow. We have to keep attuned to that and make sure that we're constantly working to stay in compliance. The conclusions we've come to are basically this. People are generally okay with you using non-PII data, provided they know where that data is coming from and they have some reasonable controls to control who gets access to it and when to turn it off. What we think is really interesting is that there's so many companies in our industry, such as the telecom companies, the cable companies, of course Facebook, organizations who have massive amounts of personally identifiable data, and they're having a hard time plausibly convincing the consumer population that they're able to keep the PII and non-PII separate, and it's creating a climate that we have to constantly work within and be ready to be nimble in. And then finally, there's this whole attribution revolution. It's this idea that you're going to be buying advertising in any form, traditional or otherwise, and that you're not going to be able to prove that it's having a business impact is kind of like an endangered species, right? Anybody here selling display ads in 2010 to 2013? Anybody? Okay, a couple people dated themselves, thank you. I'm old. So in 2010, when we launched kind of the first DSPs, right? It turns out that all the big web publishers had their direct sales team selling their impressions in bulk, and by the way, it was premium, and everything that was in programmatic was remnant, right? It was the junk that we couldn't get rid of. But the problem was the jeweler advertisers came to us and they said, look, I want to reach people who physically set foot in a competing jewelry store. I want to target people who spent the last hour physically reading or searching on keywords related to people who are actively buying jewelry. It turns out it didn't matter that much if you had the right creative in front of the right person on a blog site that got 20 visitors a month and they converted. The definition of premium started to go through a whole new cycle, and it basically put a major dent in the display business. So if you sit where I sit today watching what's happening in linear TV, there's a bunch of TV broadcasting companies out there with a bunch of direct sales teams out there selling big high impression buys in bulk. They're having scale issues. They're ganging up together. They're creating ad networks, and this starts to feel like 2013 all over again. It feels like deja vu to us, and it feels like the market's coming down to the one-to-one data targeting business. And if you're a DSP like us or our other friends who are represented here, it's an exciting time because in a world where you have to be able to prove return on ad spend, visitation, conversions, it's a world we've been living in for a long time, and the currency is very different than GRPs and things like that. Okay? So we've seen this location data evolution take place in our business. When we originally started, we did a lot of DMA targeting. Then we did a lot of zip code targeting. Then we got into the mobile geofencing business and spent a lot of time competing against the mobile ad networks who had scale issues. And that really brings us down to this idea of addressable or household level marketing, which I'll better define in a minute. The direct-to-consumer brands, many of which we work with, and many of the agencies who are looking to woo them, have basically found that these organizations have proven that they can have a one-to-one conversation with a high degree of personalization on a very individualized household basis. So to that extent, my wife and I get tons of advertising for Noble. My neighbor doesn't even know who Noble is, and that's exactly how Noble wants to work. And they want to do nationwide campaigns with that kind of precision and that kind of expectation, right? So that brings us to, hopefully, the quick demo I'm going to give you here in a minute and then send you back to your breakfast, but addressable. The simplest definition I've heard is household level marketing, or this idea that two households are consuming the same content but receiving different advertising messages. Unfortunately, it's a term that came up in the cable TV space, so it became synonymous with set-top box data and this idea that 2 minutes per hour of advertising is going to be addressable in a linear environment using an IP-based methodology. And those organizations, of course, they're charging 4 and 5 times their CPMs for that level of targeting. They've got scale issues. They're aggregating behind national sales organizations you've all been introduced to, like the Via Medias and NCCs of the world. And it feels very dated in its approach, and increasingly PII is under very skeptical, IP is under very skeptical eyes being PII. Already, tons of publishers who send us ad calls are truncating or shortening the IP for those concerns, and so, and those organizations have tons of PII data, so it's going to be a really interesting world. So, the first thing we attempted to do last year is we have tons of clients who came to us and said they actually have tons of household level data, right? They said, we've got the CRM system and we've got all of this data and we're using it for direct mail, we're using it for email, and we want to activate that data at an address level, and we want to do that digitally. And the first thing we did what most people do is we went to all the data onboarding companies, all of which you know, the IP targeting companies, the data onboarding companies, and what we found, and maybe you found something better, was that we were paying a premium to onboard this data only to get a crappy match rate and to lose all the household level granularity that was behind the data at the household level in the CRM system. And so it just didn't really work for us. And so we started working with one of our large cable providers, one of the largest in the country, to try to build a solution that we thought was more scalable and more precise. And so we built something called Addressable geofencing that we launched last November. What had happened is it was originally a first-party audience tool. If you have an address list, whether it's 100 addresses or 5 million addresses, you could actually upload the addresses in our system. The system will convert every physical address to latitude and longitude on the taxable plat line and create essentially a household-level geofence at the address level, and then cache away and throw away the address data so you're left with 1 million individualized geofences. And then we use our own heuristics along with many of the cross-device companies that you guys know and respect to try to unify those devices so that we can do household-level marketing at greater scale. We didn't charge for it. We still don't charge for it. The match rate's like 99%. We've seen a lot of success in political. We've seen a lot of success in the DTC brands. We have multiple direct mail companies who are building on our API because they've got all this household level data, so they want to be able to sell you a direct mail campaign, hit a button, activate a digital distribution. And so it plays really nice for companies who have all kinds of first-party address level data. So the bigger challenge, however, well, it's more precise. I think I mentioned to you that we think it's got infinitely more scale. It allows you to do addressable advertising at scale relatively quickly. It gives you a lot of controls that you couldn't get if you were buying a bunch of pre-built segments. And ultimately, we have our own foot traffic-based attribution solution built into it, so you can measure household-level visitation to business location, natural rate of visitation, conversion rates in real time. We're happy to traffic the cubics and place and location sciences, all the location guys of the world. Most of those people have reporting on a delay. Our ad ops people need a solution that they can optimize to foot traffic on a more regular basis, and we play nice with those companies, and we perform quite well. But anyway, it's been great. So here's the deal. I've gotten down to like 5 slides. I want to show you the curation tool. It turns out that a bunch of our clients and agencies says, we love what you're doing with the first-party address data, but we don't have the addresses. We can't, our clients won't give us the data. And so we need you to tap into organizations who do have the addresses. Well, as everybody in this room knows, the major credit bureaus, as an example, the Experian and TransUnion of the world, they have amazing household level data. Most of the data providing companies like the Axiom's and Oracle's of the world, they have this amazing household level data, but unfortunately they group it up into the taxonomies and force you to buy it in segments. And we basically stood up and said, we don't want to be the 200th company buying the pre-built segments. So if you want to work with us and you want to work with our clients for localized execution, you got to give us an API access that allows us to curate and comb through the data variables that exist within your system so that we can craft household level audiences without having to buy your pre-built segments, by their standard names. And so let me just show you how it works real quick. In our system, you can select a location. You can select a postal code, a city metro area, congressional districts, carrier routes, addresses. You can upload 1,000 addresses and define a radius. So you basically select an area. In this particular case, I selected 2 zip codes. The minute I selected 2 zip codes, it tells me that there's 6,983 residential plots that are located in that particular zip codes I selected. And then from that point, we go in and we start curating against the companies like the major credit bureaus, the census companies, and a lot of the major data providers with kind of a different level of access. It's 300 variables that expand to about 800 variables. You can do it on an all-you-can-eat basis, so you can select as many data variables as you want. I'm using demographic for here. You can use them for inclusion or exclusion, so female, age range, excluding this household. Once you've selected the audience variables, you apply that to that count, and what you'll see is that once we applied it to the location, it now narrowed down the household count to 1,058 households. We're giving you real-time household counts. The next evolution of this in early Q4 is going to give you device count breakouts. It's going to say that it's 1,058 households. It's this number of mobile devices, this number of desktop laptops, this number of web-connected TVs. The third evolution of it by the end of Q4 is it's going to comb across the thousands of private marketplace deals, and it's going to show you the households you're targeting, which private marketplace deals it's over-indexing against, so you can do some inventory curation against these households as well. So you take this data, you activate this campaign, it converts these physical addresses to Platline for execution, and then from there, you can do all the things that you would expect to be able to do in a DSP, frequency cap, day parting, inventory selections. You can select the devices you want to target, in-app or in-browser. If you happen to be targeting web-connected TVs, you can target the particular web-connected devices. And we're dynamically modifying this list because there's like 500 web-connected devices that we're seeing in the ad calls. And anytime we see frequency on any device reach a certain point, we dynamically modify this device so you can define whether you want to target or not target certain web-connected devices across large screens. So in the truest sense of the word, we're building basically a solution that taps into a data ecosystem that you're all familiar with to give you the ability to curate at a household level with more control than buying the pre-built segments that we see in a lot of systems. We think that this is a great solution for obviously activating CTV campaigns, but it's been great for doing just addressable display, addressable native, addressable mobile. It's been the fastest growing product in the history of our company. Everybody's definition of quality in this business is completely different, but we're committed to having the highest quality inventory sources in our system, using the most precise methodology we can get our hands on for audience targeting and to be compliant and work with all the many third parties and all the methodologies that you're forced to deploy and that you ask us to succumb to. So with that, thank you again for coming to the conference. That's our nationwide addressable curation tool. Gil works for us here. He's the lonely guy at the front table. I've got 55 salespeople around the country in almost every major media market. So when they call you, please take their call and treat them nicely. And I will try to train them to not waste your time. Thank you.
James, thank you so